The remote control felt heavy in Eleanor Finch's hand, a plastic scepter in a kingdom of faded floral furniture and dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Retirement had not been the golden sunset she had imagined. It was a long gray twilight, filled with the drone of daytime television and the bitter taste of tea gone cold. She flicked through the channels, her thumb moving with the agitated rhythm of a trapped insect. News, commercials, talk shows. Nothing. Nothing but noise to fill the silence left by a life that had, in her opinion, failed to properly reward her decades of service. She had been a teacher, not just any teacher, but a gatekeeper. She taught advanced placement physics at Northgate High, a position she held for 37 years. She believed her job was not to nurture dreams, but to prune them, to cut away the unrealistic ambitions so that the hard, practical realities of life could grow. She saw herself as a purveyor of truth, no matter how harsh. The screen flickered to a cable news network, a special report. The future is now, a conversation with a young visionary. Eleanor scoffed, ready to change the channel. Another self-important millennial with a phone app, no doubt. But the face that appeared on the screen made her thumb freeze over the button. It was a young woman, poised and articulate, with eyes that held a fire Eleanor vaguely remembered. The chyron beneath her read, Imani Washington, inventor and philanthropist. The name echoed in the hollow chambers of her memory. Washington. Imani Washington. Ms. Washington, the anchor was saying, his voice oozing admiration, your Aquagen system is being hailed as the single greatest humanitarian invention of the decade. A portable, low-cost device that can purify any water source, providing clean drinking water for millions. How does a 22-year-old even begin to conceive of something so revolutionary? Eleanor's teacup rattled in its saucer. The face. The name. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the memory, sharp and cruel as a shard of glass, was undeniable. She remembered the girl. Oh, she remembered. She remembered a crowded classroom, the smell of chalk dust, and a quiet but determined girl with a preposterous idea. And she remembered the words she had spoken. Words dropped like stones into the placid pool of a young girl's hope. Words like poison. To understand the profound shock that was now turning Eleanor Finch's face to a mask of gray stone, we must go back. We must go back 4 years to a classroom where a dream was nearly extinguished before it ever had the chance to burn. 4 years earlier, Imani Washington's world was a universe away from the bright lights of a television studio. Her world was small and circumscribed by need. It was the scent of bleach and fried onions at the diner where she worked after school. It was the creak of the floorboards in the tiny 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her grandmother, a space filled with more love than furniture. It was the persistent worry that gnawed at the edges of her thoughts, a constant hum of overdue bills and her grandmother's mounting medical expenses. Her parents were gone, taken in a car accident 2 years prior, leaving a void in her life that ached with a phantom pain. Her grandmother, Evelyn, was her rock, a woman whose hands were gnarled from a lifetime of work, but whose spirit remained as supple and strong as a willow branch. But Evelyn's health was failing, her breath growing shorter, her body weaker. The responsibility fell to Imani, a weight she carried without complaint, but a weight nonetheless. Her life was a frantic juggling act. A PE classes by day, slinging hash at the diner by night. She would come home, the smell of grease clinging to her clothes, and sit at the small, wobbly kitchen table to do her homework, often studying until her eyelids felt like lead weights. In one corner of the table was her physics textbook, its cover worn and its pages filled with her neat, precise notes. In the other was the pile of bills, a stark reminder of why she pushed herself so hard. She was tired. She was hungry. She was shouldering a burden no 17-year-old should have to bear. But inside Imani Washington, a fire burned. It was a quiet fire, not a raging inferno, but it was steady and incredibly hot. It was the fire of curiosity, the unquenchable thirst to understand how the world worked. It was a gift from her father, an engineer who had filled her childhood with wonder, showing her the physics in a spiraling football and the chemistry in a rising cake. His dream had been for her to follow in his footsteps, to use her brilliant mind to build a better world. That dream was now hers. It was the fuel for her fire. Her specific obsession was water. She had done a report in the 9th grade on the global water crisis, and the images had seared themselves into her mind. Children drinking from muddy puddles, women walking miles for a single bucket of contaminated water. It felt profoundly wrong, a problem that, to her logical mind, must have a solution. So in the stolen moments between school, work, and caring for her grandmother, she worked on it. In a corner of their tiny apartment, she had a makeshift lab. It was nothing more than a collection of scavenged parts. Old pipes, discarded filters, a small pump from a broken fish tank. She read everything she could, her mind racing with concepts of reverse osmosis, ionic charges, and molecular filtration. She believed she was onto something, a new method that was both cheaper and more efficient than anything that currently existed. It was her entry for the state science fair, her one shot, she believed, to win a scholarship that could change everything. It was her ticket out. It was her hope. That hope carried her into room 213, Mrs. Eleanor Finch's advanced placement physics class. The room was sterile and cold, much like its steward. Mrs. Finch stood at the front, a stern figure in a gray tweed suit, her face set in a permanent expression of mild disapproval. She believed in order, in rules, in the cold, hard facts of science. She did not believe in flights of fancy. "Today," Mrs. Finch announced, her voice cutting through the low chatter of the students, "we will be hearing the proposals for the state science fair. I will be selecting only one project from this class to endorse. 1. Do not waste my time with foolishness." One by one, students presented their ideas: a more efficient solar panel, a study on acoustic levitation, a robotic arm. Mrs. Finch listened to each with a critical ear, dismantling most with a few sharp, targeted questions. Imani's heart pounded against her ribs. She clutched her presentation notes, the paper damp in her sweaty palm. Then, it was her turn. Imani Washington. Imani walked to the front of the class, her worn sneakers silent on the linoleum floor. She felt the eyes of her classmates on her. She knew what some of them thought. She was the quiet girl, the poor girl, the one who always looked tired. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice, though soft, was filled with a passion that was undeniable. She didn't just present a project, she presented a problem. She spoke of the millions of lives lost to waterborne diseases, of the futures cut short. Then she laid out her solution: the AquaGen system. She explained the novel filtration membrane she was developing, the unique cyclonic separation method, the potential for it to be powered by a simple hand crank. For a moment, the room was silent, caught in the spell of her conviction. She had dared to dream on a global scale. Mrs. Finch let the silence hang in the air before shattering it with a single dry laugh. It was not a sound of amusement. It was a sound of dismissal. "Miss Washington," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "that is quite the fantasy." Imani blinked. "It's not a fantasy, Mrs. Finch. The science is sound. The preliminary calculations—" "Calculations," Mrs. Finch interrupted, stepping closer. "You are a high school student working with scrap metal in your apartment. Companies with billions of dollars in research and development have not solved this problem. But you believe you can do it with a fish tank pump?" A few students snickered. Imani's cheeks burned with humiliation. "The scale is different, but the principles are the same. I believe it's possible." She refused to back down. Her father had taught her to stand by her work. Her defiance seemed to infuriate Mrs. Finch. The teacher's face hardened, her eyes narrowing into cruel slits. She saw a girl reaching for a star that was, in her cold estimation, hopelessly out of reach. It was her duty, her job, to pull her back down to earth. "Let me be clear with you, Miss Washington," Mrs. Finch said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous tone that carried to every corner of the silent room. "You need to get these grandiose ideas out of your head. You are wasting your time and mine." Imani stood her ground, though her hands were trembling. "My idea is valid." And that is when Mrs. Finch delivered the blow. She looked Imani up and down, taking in her second-hand clothes, her tired eyes, her race. Her lips curled into a sneer. "A girl like you," she said, the words sharp and heavy. "You will never get into college. Not a real one anyway. You don't have the mind for it. You don't have the background for it. You don't have the resources. People like you need to be realistic." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "A girl like you. People like you." The meaning was clear, an ugly prejudice laid bare for all to see. "My advice to you," Mrs. Finch continued, her voice rising now, a cruel crescendo of judgment, "is to forget about science fairs and universities. Focus on your little job at the diner. Maybe the community college has a vocational program that would be more your speed. That is a realistic goal. This," she waved a dismissive hand at Imani's detailed diagrams on the whiteboard, "is a pipe dream. You are not a scientist. You are not an engineer. And you never will be. Now sit down." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of shock, of complicity, of fear. No one spoke up. No one defended her. The students just stared, some with pity, some with a smug sense of superiority. Most just relieved the teacher's wrath wasn't directed at them. Imani felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Every ounce of air had been punched from her lungs. She had been publicly stripped bare, her dreams and aspirations dismissed as worthless, her very identity reduced to a stereotype. She stumbled back to her seat, her presentation papers slipping from her numb fingers and scattering across the floor. She didn't pick them up. She couldn't. She just sat there, her head bowed, as Mrs. Finch announced that another student's much safer, much less ambitious project had been selected for the fair. The rest of the class was a blur. The bell rang, a shrill, jarring sound that finally released her from her paralysis. Imani fled. She ran from the classroom, from the staring eyes, from the lingering poison of Mrs. Finch's words. She found an empty hallway and collapsed onto a bench, the tears she had been holding back finally breaking free. They were hot, bitter tears of humiliation and rage and a deep, crushing despair. Maybe Mrs. Finch was right. Who was she to think she could change the world? She was just a poor girl from the South Side, a girl whose life was a daily struggle for survival. Maybe her dreams were too big. Maybe she was destined for a life of waiting tables and worrying about bills. Those are some heavy tears for a Friday. The voice was deep and gentle. Imani looked up to see Mr. Henderson, the school's elderly janitor. He was a kind man with a slow smile and eyes that had seen more than most. He held a dustpan in one hand and a broom in the other. "It's nothing," Imani mumbled, wiping at her eyes. Mr. Henderson sat down beside her, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't press her. He just sat in silence, a comforting, solid presence beside her. After a long moment, he spoke again. "I was sweeping outside room 213, he said quietly. "Doors are thin. Sound travels." Imani flinched, a fresh wave of shame washing over her. "Don't you let that woman's words take root in your heart. You hear me?" Mr. Henderson said, his voice firm. "Some people, they can't stand to see a flower growing in a place they don't think it belongs. So they try to stomp on it. They try to pour salt on the soil. But that don't change the nature of the flower, does it?" He looked at her, his gaze direct and full of a profound belief that startled her. "I see you. I see you stay late studying. I see you reading books thicker than a brick. I see the light in you. Don't you ever let someone who is afraid of the light convince you to live in the dark." He patted her shoulder gently. "Her words are her prison, not yours. Don't you dare let them be." Mr. Henderson's words were a balm on her wounded spirit. They didn't magically fix the hurt, but they gave her a lifeline. She took a shuddering breath and nodded, a tiny spark of her fire reigniting in the darkness. She would not let Eleanor Finch win. She would not let her poison steal her light. That night, after a long shift at the diner and after helping her grandmother get to bed, Imani went to her corner. She looked at her makeshift lab, at the diagrams Mrs. Finch had called a fantasy. For a moment, doubt crept back in. But then she remembered Mr. Henderson's words. She remembered her father's belief in her. She picked up a wrench, and she got back to work. The rejection from the science fair was a blow, but it was also a liberation. No longer bound by the rules and expectations of others, Imani poured all of her energy into her project. The garage of her apartment building, a dusty, forgotten space, became her sanctuary. She worked with a singular focus, fueled by righteous anger and a burning desire to prove Mrs. Finch wrong. Her life became a grueling rhythm of survival and creation. Wake up, school, diner, home, garage. Sleep was a luxury. Her social life was non-existent. While other teenagers were at football games and parties, Imani was tinkering with PVC pipes and calibrating pressure sensors, her hands often smudged with grease, and her mind alight with complex equations. Her grandmother worried, but she also saw the fire in Imani's eyes and knew this was something she had to do. One particularly cold and rainy November night, the diner was nearly empty. Imani was wiping down the counter, her body aching with fatigue. The bell over the door jingled, and a man shuffled in, bringing a gust of wet, cold air with him. He was drenched, his clothes ragged, his gray beard matted. He looked like he hadn't had a warm meal or a dry place to sleep in a long time. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Stan, took one look at him and scowled. "Hey, you can't be in here," Stan barked. "We're not a shelter. Go on, get out." The man flinched, looking embarrassed and lost. He just stood there, dripping onto the floor. Something in Imani's heart clenched. She saw not just a homeless man, but a person who was cold and hungry. She thought of her own struggles, of the times she and her grandmother had to choose between paying for medicine or buying enough groceries. She thought of what Mr. Henderson had said about people trying to stomp on a flower. "Stan, wait," Imani said, stepping forward. "It's okay. He can sit in my section. I'll take care of it." "On your dime, then," Stan grumbled, retreating to the kitchen. "Don't expect him to pay." Imani led the man to a booth in the corner. "Please sit down," she said gently. "Can I get you something hot? Some coffee? A bowl of soup?" The man looked at her, his eyes a surprisingly clear and intelligent blue, filled with a weary gratitude. "Anything warm would be a blessing," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Thank you." Imani brought him a steaming bowl of beef stew, a side of bread, and a mug of black coffee. She paid for it out of the meager tips in her pocket, money she had been saving for a new solenoid valve for her project. It was a sacrifice, but it didn't feel like one. It felt right. As the man ate slowly at first, then with a growing hunger, a quiet conversation started between them. He asked her name. He asked her about school. There was a gentleness and a sharp intellect to him that belied his appearance. "You look tired, Imani," he said, after she refilled his coffee. "You carry a lot on your shoulders." She was surprised by his perception. She found herself opening up, something she rarely did with strangers. She told him about her grandmother, about her job, and hesitatingly about her project in the garage. She expected him to be confused or dismissive, like everyone else. Instead, he listened with an unnerving intensity. "A cyclonic separator," he mused, his brow furrowed in thought. "Are you having trouble with maintaining laminar flow at higher pressures?" Imani stared at him, stunned. How did you know that?" That was the exact problem that had been plaguing her for weeks. The man smiled, a faint, sad smile. "I used to dabble in fluid dynamics. Have you considered using a variable pitch impeller to adjust for pressure fluctuations? It might solve your turbulence issue." He then proceeded to sketch a complex diagram on a napkin, his hand moving with a confidence and precision that was astonishing. He explained the concept with a clarity that surpassed any textbook she had ever read. It was brilliant. It was the solution she had been missing. "Who are you?" Imani asked, her voice filled with awe. The man just shook his head. "Just a traveler. My name is Silas." He finished his meal, stood up, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You have a gift, Imani, and more than that, you have a good heart. Don't ever lose that. It's more valuable than any invention. Thank you for the meal. Thank you for your kindness." And with that, he was gone, disappearing back into the rainy night as mysteriously as he had appeared. Imani was left staring at the napkin, a brilliant piece of engineering scrawled on a flimsy piece of paper. She never expected to see him again. She tucked the napkin carefully into her pocket, feeling a renewed sense of hope. The universe, it seemed, had sent her a sign. Imani graduated from Northgate High with honors, but not without a scar. Mrs. Finch, true to her word, had written a letter of recommendation so lukewarm it was practically an indictment, damning her with faint praise and subtly questioning her focus. The top-tier engineering schools she had dreamed of sent thin envelopes of rejection. The sting of Mrs. Finch's victory was sharp, but Imani did not give up. She enrolled in the engineering program at the local state university, a good school, but not the MIT or Caltech she had aspired to. She continued to work at the diner, continued to care for her grandmother, and continued to pour every spare moment and dollar into her project. The diagram Silas had drawn on the napkin proved to be the key. She built the new impeller, and it worked. It worked perfectly. Life settled into a new, demanding routine. College classes were harder, the diner shifts were longer, and her grandmother's health was more precarious. There were days when she felt like she was drowning, when the weight of it all was too much to bear. But the thought of Mrs. Finch's smug face and the memory of a kind stranger's belief in her kept her going. A few months into her freshman year, as she was walking home from the bus stop, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, and a woman in a sharp business suit looked out. "Are you Imani Washington?" the woman asked. Imani nodded warily. "Yes?" "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm an attorney. Could you spare a moment? It's a matter of some importance." Her heart hammered. Was it about the bills? Was her grandmother's health insurance being canceled? She braced for the worst. She got into the car, her mind racing through a dozen terrible scenarios. They drove in silence to a downtown office building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to scrape the sky. They rode a silent, high-speed elevator to the penthouse floor. The office was vast and minimalist, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking view of the city. Sitting behind a large mahogany desk was a man. He was clean-shaven, his gray hair was expertly cut, and he wore an impeccably tailored suit that probably cost more than Imani earned in a year. But she recognized his eyes. They were the same clear, intelligent blue eyes she remembered from the diner. It was Silas. Imani stood frozen in the doorway, her mind struggling to reconcile the man in the ragged clothes with the powerful figure before her. He stood and smiled that same gentle smile. "Hello, Imani. It's good to see you again. Please, come in." "Silas?" she whispered, confused. "My full name is Silas Blackwood," he said. The name hit her like a physical blow. Silas Blackwood. The reclusive, legendary founder of Blackwood Innovations, one of the largest and most influential tech companies in the world. He was a genius, a billionaire, a figure of almost mythical status who had dropped out of public life years ago. I don't understand," she stammered. "A few years ago," Silas explained, his voice soft, "I grew tired of the world I had built. Surrounded by people who wanted something from me, I lost faith in humanity. So I decided to conduct an experiment. I walked away from it all, living on the streets, to see if there was any genuine kindness left in the world. For months I found very little. And then, one rainy night, I walked into a diner, and a young woman spent her last few dollars to buy a stranger a meal. He looked directly at her, his eyes filled with a sincere warmth. "You, Imani, restored my faith. You didn't help me because you thought I was someone important. You helped me because you saw a person in need. Your kindness was pure." He continued, "And then you told me about your project. And I didn't just see a brilliant idea. I saw a brilliant mind driven by a noble purpose. I have been following your progress ever since." The lawyer, Ms. Chen, stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the desk. "Mr. Blackwood would like to make you an offer, Ms. Washington." Silas opened the folder. "I want to fund your project, not as an investment, but as a partnership. I am creating a new philanthropic branch of my company, the Blackwood Global Initiative. Its first project will be the development and worldwide distribution of your Aquagen system. We will provide you with a state-of-the-art laboratory, a team of the best engineers in the world to assist you, and a generous salary so you no longer have to worry about anything but your work." Imani was speechless. Her legs felt weak. She gripped the back of a chair for support. "And one more thing," Silas said, sliding another document across the desk. This is the deed to a house in a quiet neighborhood not far from here. It's fully furnished. My personal physicians are also taking over your grandmother's care, effective immediately. All her medical bills, past and future, have been paid in full. Tears streamed down Imani's face. Not tears of sadness or humiliation, but tears of overwhelming, earth-shattering joy. It was too much. It felt like a dream. Why? She finally managed to choke out. Why are you doing all this? Silas Blackwood's expression was serious. Because the world needs more people like you, Imani. People who are not just brilliant, but good. And people like you should never have to struggle. Now let's go change the world. The next 3 years were a whirlwind. True to his word, Silas Blackwood gave Imani everything she needed. She moved with her grandmother into the beautiful new house, a place with a garden and a reliable furnace. For the first time in her life, she didn't have to worry about money. She could focus entirely on her work. The lab they built for her was a scientist's paradise. It was a gleaming facility filled with equipment she had only ever dreamed of. She was no longer working with scrap parts. She had access to the best technology and the brightest minds. But she was the leader. It was her vision, her project. The team of seasoned engineers treated her not as a student, but as a visionary. Their respect for her talent absolute. Under her leadership, the Aquagen system evolved from a garage prototype into a sleek, efficient, and revolutionary device. It was even better than she had imagined. It was small enough to be carried by one person, durable enough to withstand the harshest environments, and so efficient it could purify over 1,000 gallons of water a day using only the power generated by a hand crank. It was a miracle of engineering. Her miracle. They filed for patents, not to make a profit, but to protect the technology from being exploited. The mission of the Blackwood Global Initiative was clear: to deploy the Aquagen system for free to any community in the world that needed it. As the first production units rolled off the assembly line and were shipped to remote villages in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, the stories began to pour in. Stories of communities transformed, of infant mortality rates plummeting, of children going to school instead of spending their days fetching contaminated water. Imani's dream was no longer a diagram on a whiteboard. It was real. It was saving lives. The world began to take notice. First, it was articles in scientific journals, then features in major newspapers. The story of the young, brilliant inventor who had solved the water crisis was too compelling to ignore. Soon, the major news networks came calling, which is how Imani Washington found herself, at 22 years old, sitting across from one of the most famous news anchors in the world, in a television studio in New York City, telling her story to an audience of millions. And it is how, in a quiet, lonely house filled with regrets, Eleanor Finch found herself staring at the ghost of a girl she had tried to bury. Back in her dimly lit living room, Eleanor Finch watched, mesmerized in horror. The anchor was fawning over Imani. "It's simply incredible. You've achieved more at 22 than most people do in a lifetime. There must have been teachers, mentors, who saw your potential early on, who nurtured this incredible gift." Imani smiled, a graceful, enigmatic smile. "I had some wonderful people who believed in me," she said, her voice smooth and confident. "My father, my grandmother, and others I met along the way who showed me great kindness when I needed it most." She didn't mention Mrs. Finch. The omission was more damning than any accusation. The interview ended. The screen cut to a commercial for a luxury car. Eleanor sat in stunned silence. The girl she had dismissed, the girl she had sentenced to a life of mediocrity, was being celebrated as a global hero. A girl like you. The words echoed in her head, mocking her. What kind of girl was Imani Washington? A brilliant one, a world-changing one. And Eleanor, the great gatekeeper of potential, had been spectacularly, monumentally wrong. It was more than just being wrong. It was a fundamental repudiation of her entire worldview. She had spent her life sorting people into boxes, labeling them, deciding their worth based on their background, their clothes, their zip code, and she had been so confident in her judgment, so arrogant. The story did not end with the interview. In the age of the internet, stories like Imani's have a life of their own. A young journalist, who had been a student in that very AP physics class 4 years ago, watched the CNN special. He had been one of the silent ones, too afraid to speak up, but he had never forgotten the casual cruelty of that day. He remembered the look on Imani's face. Now a reporter for a major online news outlet, he saw a story that needed to be told. He wrote an article. It was titled, "I was in the room when a teacher told the next Einstein she would never go to college." The piece was a viral sensation. It exploded across social media. He didn't name Mrs. Finch, but he described the incident in such vivid detail that anyone from Northgate High knew exactly who he was talking about. The story was picked up by other news outlets. The hashtag #IStandWithImani began trending worldwide. People were outraged by the injustice and inspired by Imani's triumph over it. The Northgate High School district was inundated with calls and emails. The pressure was immense. They launched an internal investigation into Eleanor Finch's tenure. What they found was a disturbing pattern. Countless complaints from minority students and students from low-income families had been ignored or dismissed over the years. Stories of her discouraging talented students, of her prejudiced remarks, of her blocking scholarship opportunities. The single incident with Imani was not an aberration. It was the culmination of a career built on bigotry. The school board convened an emergency meeting. They issued a formal public apology to Imani Washington, and in an unprecedented move, they voted to revoke Eleanor Finch's teaching pension, citing gross professional misconduct and a pattern of discriminatory behavior that violated the core tenets of their educational mission. The news was a devastating blow to Eleanor. Her pension was her security, her reward for a lifetime of what she considered thankless work. Now it was gone. Her name, once respected in her small community, was now synonymous with prejudice. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. She was a pariah. In a desperate, ill-advised attempt to clear her name, she agreed to an interview with a local television station. She intended to portray herself as a victim of cancel culture, a tough-love teacher who was being unfairly maligned. But on camera, under the glare of the lights, her bitterness and resentment shone through. "I was only trying to give the girl a realistic perspective," she said, her voice tight and defensive. "You have to understand, for people from her background, it's not helpful to encourage these fantasies. They don't have the same support systems. It's setting them up for failure." The reporter seized on the phrase. "Her background? What exactly do you mean by that?" Eleanor floundered. "Well, you know, the economic challenges, the culture. It's simply a different world." It was a confession, broadcast for all to see. Her prejudice, thinly veiled and ugly, was laid bare. The interview was a disaster. It only confirmed what everyone already believed. Her downfall was complete. She had not only been proven wrong, she had been exposed. Her husband, a man who valued his public standing above all else, filed for divorce the following week. She was left utterly alone in her silent, dusty house. A few weeks later, Imani was asked about the controversy in another interview. The world wanted to see her condemn the teacher who had wronged her. They wanted righteous anger. But Imani gave them something else. She sat, poised and calm, and looked into the camera. "I have been asked a lot about a teacher from my past," she began, "and I have had to think long and hard about it. What happened in that classroom was painful. Words have power, and words of discouragement, especially from someone in a position of authority, can be devastating. But my story," she continued, "is not about her. It is about what happens when we choose to believe in ourselves and in each other, even when the world tells us not to. It's about the Mr. Hendersons of the world, the janitors and grandmothers and kind strangers who offer a word of encouragement that can change a life. It's about the fire that lives inside every young person, a fire that is so precious and so easily extinguished by cynicism and prejudice." Her voice grew stronger, filled with a purpose that resonated through the screen. That is why today, the Blackwood Global Initiative is announcing the creation of the Evelyn Washington STEM Scholarship Fund, named after my grandmother. It is a $50 million fund dedicated to providing full scholarships and mentorship to promising students from underprivileged and underrepresented communities. We will not let another brilliant mind be told they are not enough. We will build a world where every child, no matter their background, is told, "You can, you will, and we will help you." The studio audience erupted in thunderous applause. Across the country, people were moved to tears. She had taken an act of personal injustice and transformed it into a force for universal good. She had refused to let bitterness define her. She had chosen grace. 1 year later, the world was a different place, in small ways and large, because of Imani Washington. The Evelyn Washington Scholars, the first cohort of bright, ambitious students, were thriving at universities across the country. The Aquagen system was now in operation in over 40 countries, providing clean water to over 10 million people. The name Imani Washington had become a verb in some circles, meaning to overcome impossible odds with grace and intelligence. Imani was not just an inventor anymore. She was a leader. She ran her foundation with a steady hand, her days filled with meetings with world leaders, engineers, and the young students she mentored personally. She was a powerful woman, yet she had not lost the humility and kindness that Silas Blackwood had first seen in her. She made a point to visit her old high school. The administration had been completely overhauled. The new principal, a dynamic young woman of color, welcomed her as a hero. Imani gave a speech in the same auditorium where she had once felt so small. She told the students her story, not to brag, but to inspire. "Your circumstances do not define your potential," she told them. "Your imagination, your hard work, and your kindness to others. That is what defines you." After the speech, she sought out Mr. Henderson. He was retired now, living in a small, neat house. She had found him months ago and, through an anonymous trust, arranged for him to have a comfortable and generous pension for the rest of his life. He had no idea it was from her. She visited him not as a benefactor, but as a friend. They sat on his porch drinking lemonade, and he told her, with a proud twinkle in his eye, "I always knew you had it in you, child. I always knew." As she was leaving her old neighborhood, she passed a small park. A young girl, maybe 14, was sitting on a bench, staring at a thick calculus textbook with a look of utter frustration on her face. She looked tired. She looked overwhelmed. Imani smiled. She thought of Silas, walking into the diner on that rainy night. She walked over and sat down on the other end of the bench. "Looks like a tough one," Imani said gently. The girl looked up, startled. "It's impossible," she sighed. "I'll never get it." "I used to feel that way about fluid dynamics," Imani said with a warm smile. "Sometimes you just need a fresh pair of eyes. My name is Imani. What are you working on?" The cycle of kindness continued. The light she had so fiercely protected was now bright enough to illuminate the path for others. She had been told she was nothing. Now she was everything. She had been told she had no future. Now she was building it for everyone.